The night was cold, ruthless, and soaked in rain. One of those nights where even the streetlights seemed to shiver. Beneath the broken glow, a homeless man named Jeb unwrapped his only meal, fingers trembling from the chill and the weight of another forgotten day. Then came the boy, soaked, silent, and out of place. Designer clothes ruined by mud, fear in his eyes deeper than hunger in his belly. Jeb didn't ask questions. He just tore the sandwich in half and offered it without a word. That moment, simple, silent, human, changed everything. Because the boy wasn't just lost. He was the runaway son of a billionaire. And Jeb, the man the world ignored, had just stepped into a storm that would expose the cracks in power, in privilege, and in what it truly means to save someone. It all started with a shared meal. What followed, no one saw coming. The rain didn't just fall that day. It collapsed from the sky in sheets, like the heavens themselves were grieving for the forgotten corners of the city, where puddles swallowed cigarette butts and broken dreams alike. It was the kind of storm that made people rush to cover, curse the clouds, and pull tighter at the collars of their expensive coats, unless they had nowhere to go. And under the rusted awning of a closed-down deli in a neighborhood time had abandoned, a man with eyes like faded maps and skin folded by decades of wind, loss, and silence sat alone, cross-legged on a crate that used to hold milk, back when the store behind him still served customers. He wore 3 layers of clothing, none of them enough, and cupped his hands around a torn piece of wax paper, inside of which sat a sandwich, half-eaten, damp at the corners, but still intact. It wasn't much. It never was. But it was something. And when you've got nothing, something feels like a miracle. Jeb took slow, patient bites, as if stretching time with each chew, and let the silence fill in the gaps where conversation might have once lived. He didn't expect company, didn't want it. People rarely looked twice at him anymore, except to offer judgment or pity. But today, as the storm crescendoed into fury and the gutters gargled with runoff, the sound of footsteps cut through the downpour like a whisper through glass, light, hurried, unfamiliar. He looked up. At first all he saw was motion, a shadow flitting past, limbs tangled in urgency. But then it stopped. Slumped. Across the street, beneath the flicker of a dying street lamp, a boy, barely a teenager, collapsed onto a stoop, his hands pressed against his knees, chest heaving, hoodie soaked straight through to his bones. Jeb watched. That's all he did. Observed like he always had. But something in the way the kid shivered, the way he looked back over his shoulder as if chased by something darker than rain, stirred an old instinct in Jeb, one long buried beneath cold nights and colder memories. The kid's sneakers were pristine, white, expensive, a brand Jeb had seen on the billboards downtown, but they were caked with grime now, and the soles slapped the pavement like desperation as he staggered toward the awning. He didn't ask for help. Didn't speak. Just stopped. Right there, a few feet from Jeb. They stared at each other, 2 men on opposite sides of life's coin, one worn down to rust, the other still gleaming but dented in ways that mattered. And then, slowly, with the kind of hesitation that only comes from pride meeting hunger, the boy's eyes drifted to the sandwich. Jeb could have clutched it tighter, could have turned away, but he didn't. Instead, he tore the remaining half cleanly down the middle, reached out with a hand cracked from cold and time, and offered it without a word. The kid hesitated, not because he didn't want it, but because no one had ever given him anything without asking for something back. Jeb saw that in his eyes. The disbelief, the fear. But hunger is the great equalizer, and after a moment, the boy took it. Their fingers brushed, brief, human, real. Sit, Jeb muttered, nodding toward the crate beside him. And the kid did. They sat there beneath the storm like 2 ghosts clinging to the last warmth in the world, chewing in silence, letting the sandwich anchor them in a reality they both barely understood. Jeb didn't ask questions. He never did. Life had taught him that stories reveal themselves when they're ready, and pushing only made people retreat. The boy, for his part, looked like he hadn't spoken in days, maybe longer. His hands trembled as he ate, not just from cold, but from the weight of whatever he was running from. Jeb knew that weight, carried it himself. Different name, same curse. And as the minutes passed, The deli awning felt less like a shelter and more like a confessional booth, two sinners swapping silence for salvation. Jeb glanced sideways, catching glimpses of the kid's face under the wet fringe of his hood. Eyes too sharp to be naive, jaw clenched like someone who'd had to grow up in the shadows of skyscrapers and secrets. This wasn't just a lost child. This was a boy who'd seen things. Things no one his age should have. The rain drummed on like a funeral procession, and still neither of them spoke. Until Jeb, without looking at him, said, "Bad night?" The boy swallowed hard. Nodded. "Worse than that," he said, voice barely more than a crack in the thunder. And that was all it took. Jeb didn't need to hear more. The rain was full of stories. And so were boys who ran alone through the night with shoes too clean and hearts too broken. Just as the tension began to thaw, a sound pierced the rain like a blade, tires screeching, doors flung open, and angry voices shouting a name Jeb didn't catch but the boy clearly did. His spine stiffened. His grip on the sandwich faltered. Panic bloomed across his face like a bruise. "Dylan," they called. "Dylan." Two men in dark suits, soaked and furious, scanned the streets, their movements too precise to be random. Not police. Not family. Something worse. Jeb's instinct screamed. Dylan started to rise, eyes wide, caught between running and freezing. But Jeb moved faster than anyone expected from someone his age, one hand gently clamping down on the boy's wrist, anchoring him. "You sure you want to go back?" he asked, voice low, steady, cutting through the chaos like a secret. The boy didn't answer with words. Just shook his head, slow, almost ashamed. "Not if it means pretending none of this ever happened," he whispered. Jeb nodded once. Then, without another word, he stood, pulled the tarp off his back, draped it over Dylan's shoulders, and turned toward the alley behind them. "Come on," he said. And Dylan followed. Because sometimes, when the world forgets you, the most unexpected hands are the ones that pull you back. And that night, in the middle of a storm no one else would remember, a homeless man and a runaway rich kid vanished into the rain together. Not as strangers, but as survivors on the cusp of something neither of them could yet name. Jeb led Dylan through a latticework of alleys and soaked cobblestone veins of the city, where the night echoed in metallic breaths and puddles swallowed neon like secrets. They moved fast but quiet, the storm masking their escape as sirens wailed in the far distance and the shouts of the suited men grew muffled behind them, their anger swallowed by the rain and the rot of old brick. Dylan slipped once, nearly falling on the slick concrete, but Jeb caught him with one hand and kept walking, his grip firm, eyes scanning like radar, body moving with the intuition of someone who had once run for his life and never stopped. They ducked through a rusted fire door that groaned in protest, descended a stairwell lit by a single flickering bulb, and emerged into an abandoned maintenance tunnel beneath a closed-down department store, Jeb's temporary shelter carved out of ruins, a place where rats whispered and the walls still remembered warmth. It wasn't much, but it was dry, and in a world like theirs, that was gold. Jeb lit a fire in a rusted coffee can with practiced movements, old newspapers, slivers of wood, a match that sparked like lightning in the gloom. Dylan stood in the corner, still trembling, still soaking wet, still not saying a word. Jeb didn't force anything. He simply sat, back against a support beam, and watched the flame dance while rainwater dripped in steady rhythm from a cracked pipe overhead. After a minute, Dylan moved closer, slowly, like an animal that didn't know if it was safe. He sat across from Jeb, legs crossed, arms wrapped around himself, hoodie clinging like a second skin. They sat like that for a long time, two shapes in the dark, the fire between them casting flickers of orange onto tired eyes and unsaid truths. The sandwich felt like a lifetime ago. The rain felt like another world. And in the silence, something fragile bloomed, not trust, not yet, but the beginning of it. Finally, Dylan spoke. Just 2 words. "Thank you." Jeb nodded, eyes on the fire. "You're welcome." Another pause. "I didn't know where else to go," Dylan admitted, voice cracking like glass underfoot. "Didn't want to go home. Didn't want to go anywhere." Jeb looked at him, really looked at him. The damp hair clinging to his forehead, the dried salt of tears on his cheeks, the tension in his shoulders that didn't belong on someone so young. "So you ran," Jeb said, not asking, just stating the truth out loud so it didn't eat the boy alive from the inside. Dylan nodded. They were gonna send me away. Make me disappear. Like I'm a problem to solve. Jeb didn't respond right away. Just breathed, slow and steady, like he was absorbing the words into his bones before offering anything back. Rich family? He asked eventually. Dylan nodded again. Very. The word came out like a confession. My dad's on every magazine cover. Talks about changing the world, building the future. But he doesn't even see me. His hands trembled. All he sees is a headline waiting to ruin him. Jeb shifted, his joints creaking louder than the fire. And you? You see yourself? That question hit Dylan harder than any accusation. He looked up, eyes rimmed red. Sometimes I think I don't even exist when I'm in that house. I'm just a liability. Jeb gave a quiet hum, a sound halfway between a laugh and a sigh. Funny thing, kid. The world's full of people trying to erase themselves before someone else does it first. Dylan blinked. You too. Jeb didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a thermos so battered it looked like it had been through war, and maybe it had. He poured a small amount of tea into the lid, slid it across the floor toward Dylan. Still warm, he said. Dylan took it with both hands like it was sacred. Shivered. This place, this night, it's the first time I haven't felt watched. Jeb gave him a look. You're still watched, kid, but not judged. The silence returned, heavier now, filled with unspoken things. Jeb stared into the fire and finally spoke again, voice softer. I had a son once. Not much older than you. Same eyes. Same fire. Dylan looked up sharply. What happened to him? Jeb didn't flinch. He died. Not all at once. Just a little more every day until he stopped trying to live. Dylan's breath caught. Why? Because he thought no one saw him, Jeb said. Thought he didn't matter. And by the time I realized how wrong he was, it was too late. The weight of it settled over them like fog. Dylan set the tea down, rubbed his eyes. Is that why you helped me? He asked, voice barely audible. Because I remind you of him? Jeb shook his head slowly. No, kid. I helped you because someone once helped me. Because this world doesn't get better by looking the other way. He leaned back, eyes closing for a moment. You shared your truth tonight. That takes guts. More than most men twice your age ever show. Dylan didn't speak. Just stared at the fire, his thoughts unraveling in the warmth. Somewhere above, the storm began to fade, the rhythm of rain slowing to a gentle patter, like the city was finally catching its breath. For the first time in hours, maybe days, Dylan felt something shift inside him. Not hope. Not yet. But possibility. The idea that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't alone in this. Jeb opened one eye, caught the look on his face, and gave a small, knowing smile. Storm's letting up, he said. But don't be fooled. The world out there's still colder than it looks. Dylan nodded, curling his knees to his chest. I don't want to go back, he whispered. Then don't, Jeb replied. Not yet. Think. He tossed a piece of jerky from his coat pocket onto the ground between them. We move at sunrise. I know a place. Dylan looked at him, heart pounding, mind spinning with questions. But he didn't ask any. Not now. Instead, he picked up the food, chewed slowly, and stared into the fire like it held the answers he hadn't dared dream of. And in that tunnel, under the city that had forgotten them both, a boy with everything to lose and a man with nothing left found something sacred in the silence between bites. The silence stretched until it softened, no longer the absence of sound but a blanket, a space where neither of them had to pretend. And when the fire finally dimmed into embers and the cold crept back into the tunnel's bones, Jeb stood without a word and covered Dylan's shoulders with an old wool blanket pulled from his makeshift bedding, as gentle as if tucking in someone he once loved. Dylan didn't stir. His eyelids fluttered, his breathing steady now, no longer ragged with fear or exhaustion. He had fallen asleep, finally, and Jeb stood over him for a moment, the firelight dancing in the hollows of his face, shadows clinging to the lines grief had carved deep into his skin. It had been a long time since anyone had needed him, truly needed him, not for money, not for forgiveness, not for pity, but simply because they had nowhere else to turn. And that kind of need, it was sacred. Morning came slowly, not with sunlight, but with the whisper of wind shifting outside the tunnel entrance, the clatter of an empty bottle rolling against the concrete, the dry cough of the city awakening above them. Jeb stirred, rubbing the stiffness from his legs, and glanced down at Dylan, who was now sitting upright, arms wrapped around the blanket, eyes clearer but still guarded. "Didn't dream," Dylan said, voice rough. "Or maybe I did and just don't remember. Either way, thank you." Jeb gave a slight nod, then stood fully and stretched, joints cracking in protest. "We've got time before the suit starts sniffing again," he said, his tone all business now. "Gotta keep moving. Can't stay in one place too long." Dylan looked at him, uncertainty flickering in his expression. "Where are we going?" Jeb picked up his bag, slung it over his shoulder, and glanced back. "Somewhere you can breathe. Place called Sable Point. It's on the edge of the river. Not many folks know about it." Dylan frowned. "What is it?" Jeb's mouth twisted into something between a smirk and a memory. "It's a place for people who got left behind but ain't ready to disappear. You'll see." They moved again, rising from the shadows like ghosts returning to the world, and walked in silence through back alleys and underpasses, past shuttered storefronts and graffiti-tagged walls that told stories more honest than the billboards. Every now and then, Dylan would glance at Jeb, curiosity chewing at the corners of his mind. "What's your name?" he asked finally, as they passed an old theater with broken letters dangling from its marquee. Jeb didn't look at him right away. Just kept walking. Then quietly he said, "Jebediah? Most folks just call me Jeb." "Jeb," Dylan repeated, like he was testing it. "That's cool. Feels like a name that's been through stuff." Jeb chuckled, the sound low and unexpected. "It has." They kept walking, past people who never looked twice, city dwellers trained to step around pain like puddles. And slowly, as the morning light filtered through cloud cover, Dylan began to notice things he never had before. How Jeb nodded at certain corners like they held memories, how his steps avoided certain cracks in the pavement, how every path he chose seemed designed to dodge attention. "How long you been out here?" Dylan asked, not to be rude, but because the silence felt like it wanted to be filled. Jeb shrugged. "Long enough to know most people ain't kind unless they're watched. And long enough to know that sometimes, the kindest people have the least to give." Dylan nodded. "My family, they have everything. Houses, cars, private jets. But none of it ever felt like it mattered. I had to schedule time with my own father. I was just another meeting on his calendar." Jeb didn't respond right away. Then he said, "Sometimes having everything means you never learn what's worth fighting for." They arrived at a train yard, half forgotten and mostly fenced off, where graffiti bloomed across cargo cars like rebellion in color. Jeb found a break in the fence and slipped through, motioning Dylan to follow. They moved between rows of rusting steel and eventually reached a hidden clearing behind a line of stacked containers. And there, nestled among broken crates and wild vines, was a makeshift camp, tents patched with duct tape, a few metal drums used for fires, crates turned into seats, and people, old and young, bundled in layers, eyes wary but not cruel, watching as the strangers arrived. Dylan tensed, but Jeb raised a hand in peace. "It's all right," he said quietly. "They're like us. Survivors." One of the older women, wrapped in a rainbow quilt, stood and shuffled over. Her face lit up when she saw Jeb. "Well, well," she said, voice like warm gravel. "Look who decided to grace us with his royal presence." Jeb smiled, something rare and real. "Been a while. Brought a guest." Mags looked at Dylan, one brow raised, eyes sharp and assessing. "He looks like trouble." "He is," Jeb said. "But the right kind." Mags nodded. "We've got room. Fire's warm. Food's thin, but what we have, we share." Dylan looked stunned. These people, who had nothing, were offering more than anyone in his world ever had. He followed Jeb toward the fire, the warmth hitting him like a promise, and sat among them, watching as the others resumed their conversations. There was laughter here. Real, cracked, broken laughter. And it made Dylan's chest ache. Mags handed him a tin plate with some rice and canned beans. "Eat," she said. "You look like you haven't in days." "Thank you," Dylan said again and meant it. As he ate he listened. To their stories. Their scars. Their jokes. And he felt something shifting inside. A light cracking through the walls he'd built around himself. Later, as night fell again and the stars blinked awake above the city's smog, Dylan sat beside Jeb near the fire. "Why do you help people?" he asked. "You don't owe us anything." Jeb stared into the flames. "I help people," he said slowly, "because one day, someone helped me when I didn't deserve it. And because my boy, before he left this world, asked me to be better than I had been. I failed him. But I won't fail again." Dylan swallowed hard, the firelight dancing in his eyes. "You didn't fail me." Jeb turned to look at him, really look. "You've got a long road ahead, Dylan. Your father's not gonna give up easy. He'll send more men. Make you an offer that sounds like safety but feels like chains." Dylan clenched his fists. "Then I won't go back. I'd rather be out here, with real people, than locked in a palace that feels like a cage." Jeb nodded slowly. "Then you'll need to learn. How to hide. How to survive. How to think like the people they never see coming." Dylan met his gaze, something fierce rising behind his tired eyes. "Teach me." And Jeb smiled, not out of joy but out of recognition. Because in that moment, under the stars and beside the fire, he saw the same fire his son once had. And this time, he would not let it die. And so began the lessons no prep school would ever teach, no legacy estate could buy, no trust fund could touch, the education of survival, of silence, of sight, of spirit, because to live invisible was an art, and Jeb was a master sculptor of the unseen. Days bled into nights in the Sable Point camp, the fire always burning low but steady, casting flickering gold on faces that bore the weight of 100 battles each. Dylan, once a soft-shouldered boy sculpted by comfort, began to change beneath the weight of every sunrise. His hands, once unfamiliar with anything rougher than piano keys and touchscreen glass, grew calloused from lifting crates, hauling water, repairing tarps that flapped in the wind like wounded flags. Jeb taught him how to listen, to footsteps, to lies, to the silence between spoken words. "It's not about hearing," he'd say. "It's about knowing when something should be there but isn't." They practiced in alleys, behind train cars, weaving through the city like it was a chessboard and they were pawns masquerading as kings. Dylan learned how to walk without sound, how to disappear behind dumpsters and evaporate into stairwells. He learned which dumpsters held untouched food behind bakeries, how to read the color of trash bags to know what was expired and what was poison. "Rich people waste better meals than most folks ever eat," Jeb grunted one morning, tearing open a bag full of unsold sandwiches. Dylan watched, ashamed and amazed. He no longer flinched at dirt under his nails or the ache in his shoulders. The kid who once fled bodyguards and Bentley chauffeurs was now running beside broken people who shared everything because they had nothing to hide. Each night, the camp told stories. Dylan sat beside Mags and the others, heard tales of artists turned addicts, teachers turned trespassers, veterans turned vagabonds, each voice a thread in a tapestry more real than any boardroom fable his father ever spun. He listened, and slowly he began to tell. About the cage of luxury. About the nights he stared at ceilings 40 feet high but felt like he was drowning. About the silence of a house so big it could hold echoes but not love. They listened. Not because he was special, but because he was finally speaking truth. And Jeb watched him grow, not into something new, but into something raw, something honest, something strong. "You're not soft anymore," Jeb said one night, passing him a broken mirror they'd found in an abandoned hotel. Dylan studied his reflection. His face was thinner now. Jawline sharper. Eyes darker, more alert. He looked older. Not because of time, but because of truth. "I look like someone else," he whispered. Jeb leaned against the wall, sipping from a dented canteen. "No. You look like you for the first time." But not everyone forgot who Dylan used to be. Because money leaves trails, digital and otherwise, and back in glass towers, his name was still worth headlines. His father had launched a quiet but relentless manhunt, not out of love but out of legacy management. Men in suits with cold eyes scoured the city like wolves, flashing photos, threatening shelters, bribing gatekeepers. And one night as Dylan returned from a food run with Jeb, a sleek black car parked across the street signaled the beginning of something darker. "Don't look," Jeb murmured, tugging Dylan behind a dumpster, the scent of rot sharp in their noses. "They're not cops. They're corporate. Dangerous." Dylan's heart slammed against his ribs. "How did they find us?" "You left a thread," Jeb growled. "That jacket, Moncler. It's got a GPS tag in the collar. Rich folks' clothes are smarter than most people." Dylan tore it off immediately, breathing hard. "What do we do?" Jeb's eyes were already scanning exits. "We vanish. Tonight. No goodbyes. We go deeper." Back at camp, they moved fast. Mags didn't ask questions, just hugged Dylan tight, whispered, "Keep running, baby wolf," and pressed a small silver cross into his palm. "This used to belong to someone I loved. Now it's yours." Dylan swallowed the lump in his throat. He didn't know how to say goodbye to the first real family he'd ever had. Jeb grabbed a canvas bag of supplies, nodded once, and within minutes, they were gone, slipping into the veins of the city like blood returning to a wounded heart. The next few nights blurred. They slept under bridges, in stairwells, in the back of a broken church where shattered stained glass painted rainbows across the pews. Dylan barely slept, his dreams crowded with headlights and shouting and the cold edge of his father's voice. Jeb never complained. Never slowed. "We're close," he said one morning. "There's a place I haven't gone in years. Used to be a train station. Long closed down. But it's safe. Quiet. The kind of forgotten that protects you." They reached it by nightfall. The station was a monolith of rust and history, its name worn away by time. Inside, the walls were crumbling but sturdy, the air thick with dust and silence. Jeb lit a lantern and led Dylan to an old storage room where he'd stashed supplies long ago, blankets, a radio, even a few cans of food. "Home," he said simply. Dylan dropped his bag, sat down, and exhaled like he hadn't in days. "Do you think they'll ever stop looking?" he asked. Jeb stared out the window, where the moon painted silver streaks across the broken tracks. "Not until they don't recognize you anymore. Not your face, not your mind, not your name." Dylan looked down at the cross in his palm, gripping it tight. "Then maybe it's time I stopped being Dylan Hale." Jeb turned, eyebrow raised. "You want a new name?" Dylan nodded. "I want to choose who I am. Not just carry the name of a man who never saw me." Jeb thought for a long moment. Then he said, "What about Ryder?" Dylan tilted his head. "Ryder means survivor," Jeb said. "Means traveler. Means you don't belong to anyone but the road you walk." Dylan smiled, and it wasn't a boy's smile. It was the smile of someone who had earned every bruise and mile. "Ryder," he repeated. "Yeah, I like that." And in that broken station, surrounded by the bones of yesterday, a runaway rich kid who once shared a sandwich with a stranger became something else entirely. Not lost. Not found. But becoming. And the man who once failed a son silently swore he wouldn't fail this one. Not this time. Ryder. The name fit like worn leather, not flashy, not fragile, just real. He wore it like armor as the days passed in the shadow of the forgotten station, his old name fading into the rust around them, into the cracked tiles and hollow echoes of footsteps that never came. Jeb taught him to fight, not with fists, but with balance, silence, timing. "Survival ain't about punching harder," he said, guiding Ryder's movements with slow, steady hands. "It's about knowing when not to fight, and when not fighting is the fight." Ryder listened. He watched. He learned. The boy who once stared into luxury like it was a mirror now stared into broken glass and saw clarity. But even as they moved like ghosts through the city's neglected veins, the hunt tightened behind them. Jeb could feel it, an invisible pressure in the wind, in the silence of alleys that used to hum with safety, in the way strangers paused a beat too long when they passed. The people looking for Ryder weren't just security contractors anymore. Now they were something else. Sleeker. Sharper. Government-tied, maybe. Private intelligence, likely. They didn't knock. They infiltrated. And one morning, when Ryder returned from a food run to find their hideout door cracked open, Jeb already gone, and the lantern on the floor, smashed, he knew it had begun. His heart pounded. The silence screamed. He backed away, melted into the shadows like Jeb taught him, and waited, watched. Then he saw them. 2 men in black coats, speaking into earpieces, scanning the room, their eyes flat, calculating. "He's not here," one said. "He moved. But not far." "We leave the tracker," the other replied, and tucked a coin-sized device under the bench. Ryder's breath caught. Tracker. They were turning his hiding places into cages. The moment they left, Ryder slipped in through the rear door, crushed the tracker underfoot, grabbed what little Jeb had left behind, his old bag, a torn photograph of a boy Ryder had only seen once, and a note scrawled in pen, 3 words, "Run. Trust no one." Ryder didn't cry. Not anymore. He ran. Just like the name said. He moved through the underground, through forgotten storm drains and half-built tunnels that only the desperate remembered. Every face was a question. Every footstep behind him felt like it carried chains. He searched for Jeb, not openly, not loudly, but with whispered names and coded signs, leaving chalk marks on lampposts the way Jeb had shown him. A cross for safety. A triangle for danger. An open circle for, "I'm still here." Days passed. Then a week. His hands shook from hunger again, and he stole bread from a delivery truck, slipping away into the crowd before the driver even noticed. He hated it, but not as much as he hated the idea of being owned again. Then one night, in a narrow corridor beneath a crumbling subway line, he heard the faintest whistle, a tune Jeb used to hum. 3 notes. Lo-lo-hi. Ryder froze. He whistled back. Hi-lo-hi. Silence. Then from behind a rusted grate, Jeb appeared, thinner, wearier, but still standing, still fire-eyed. Ryder ran to him, the name he'd buried almost tearing itself from his throat, but he caught it, Ryder, and nodded instead. Jeb gripped his shoulder. "They nearly caught me. They've got tech now. Drones, facial scanners. You can't just hide, you gotta become nobody." Ryder nodded. "Then let's disappear. For real." Jeb smiled. "Then it's time for the last lesson." What followed was the unraveling of identity. They burned Ryder's last photograph, shredded old IDs, erased his digital prints in a cafe using stolen credentials and a software Jeb swore he'd never use again. "Back in the day," Jeb said quietly, fingers dancing over the keys, "I wasn't just some guy sweeping alleys. I was in systems. The kind of tech work that makes people vanish or appear depending on the paycheck." Ryder stared. "You were," Jeb nodded. "Not proud of it. But it's why I know how to hide in plain sight. Why I know what they'll do next." "What will they do next?" Ryder asked. Jeb looked up, eyes dark. "They'll stop looking for a boy. And start hunting a threat." Because Ryder Hale, missing son of Tycoon Maxwell Hale, had now been linked to public footage, grainy, yes, but real, of him speaking to known street organizers, soup kitchen leaders, activists. To the outside world, Ryder wasn't just a runaway anymore. He was a symbol. And the rich don't tolerate symbols. So they planted stories. Articles appeared online. Claims of instability, drug use, staged videos of Ryder lashing out. They were trying to bury his new name beneath a flood of lies. But the streets didn't buy it. The truth has a pulse. And Ryder's name began to surface, not as a scandal, but as a movement. Spray-painted tags reading, "Be Ryder," appeared on bridge walls. Teens in shelters began using the name as code for resistance. And that scared the suits more than anything. Jeb saw it coming. "You became the storm, kid," he said, one night as they hid in the crawlspace of an abandoned church. "They thought you'd break. Instead, you became the match." "So what do we do?" Ryder asked. "Do we run again?" Jeb shook his head. "No. Now, we make them see what they tried to erase." Ryder didn't sleep that night. He stared at the cracked ceiling, heart thundering. The boy who once ran from a meal in the rain had become the voice of a city's forgotten. He remembered that day so clearly now, how Jeb had sat beside him, no judgment, just warmth, just humanity. One meal shared. That was all it took to start everything. A gesture no billionaire had ever offered him. And now, it was time to return the kindness with something louder. Something that couldn't be bought. A reckoning. And from that day forward, the city began to whisper his name, not as a missing person, but as a question. What if Ryder isn't lost, but leading us somewhere we've all been too afraid to go? The city didn't explode in fire or rage, it whispered first. Quiet. Steady. A name, a symbol, a rumor on subway walls and rooftop edges. Ryder lives. Not Dylan Hale, not heir to a soulless empire, but Ryder, the runaway who rose from alleyways and empty stomachs and broken systems to become something untouchable. He wasn't rich, but he was powerful. Not because of what he owned, but because of what he'd survived. And when the whispers reached the right ears, when a viral photo of a spray-painted mural of Ryder's face next to the words, "You forgot about us. We didn't forget each other," hit the screens of every major news outlet, they couldn't bury it. Maxwell Hale called a press conference. Stood beneath spotlights beside lawyers and cold-hearted advisors and said, "My son is unwell. He was abducted. Manipulated." But the world had already seen something different. They saw Ryder standing in soup kitchens, not stealing, serving. They saw him guiding lost kids to shelter, teaching them how to sleep with one eye open, how to keep hope from dying in the cold. They saw him refusing every offer to come home, every bribe from PR firms to tell his story their way. And somewhere deep in that concrete maze, Jeb watched it all unfold, pride quiet in his eyes. "You changed the story, kid," he said one night, as they sat beside a fire built from broken pallets. "You took a name they gave you and turned it into a banner for everyone they forgot." Ryder didn't smile. Not because he wasn't proud, but because it wasn't over. "They're still out there," he whispered. "Kids like I used to be. But owned by names, by systems, by families that don't even see them." Jeb nodded. "So we give them a place to start." And with nothing but an abandoned factory, a dozen tarps, a city's worth of loyalty, and the fire of a truth that refused to die, they built the Denver. Not a shelter. Not a school. A refuge. A rebellion. A place where broken wasn't shameful, and healing wasn't just a dream. Jeb handled the quiet things. The security, the wiring, the vanishing acts when danger got too close. Ryder? He did the rest. Spoke to crowds of the forgotten, not like a leader, but like one of them. He told the truth, how he'd sat in cars worth more than entire neighborhoods but felt poorer than anyone on the street. How the day he shared his last meal with a stranger in the rain was the day he woke up. The day he stopped being owned by the name Dylan Hale. The day he started becoming someone real. And kids listened. They came in ones and twos. Then by the dozens. Some still smelled like perfume from penthouses they'd escaped. Others had dirt under their fingernails and bruises that spoke louder than their voices. But all of them had something in common. The world had stopped looking for them. Until now. The den grew. Not in size, but in soul. It became a network. A heartbeat. They taught each other to survive. Then to live. Then to lead. And just when the movement reached a fever pitch, when Ryder had started to believe maybe, just maybe, the ghosts of his past had stopped chasing him, the storm returned. A letter arrived. No address. Just a symbol on the envelope, the Hale family crest. Inside, only 4 words. "We know where he is." It wasn't signed. But it didn't need to be. Jeb read it. Face hard. Voice quiet. "They're coming." Ryder didn't flinch. Let them. And so they prepared. Not for war. But for truth. Because this time, they wouldn't vanish. This time, Ryder wouldn't run. He stepped onto a rooftop in the heart of the city, camera live streaming, wind whipping through his jacket. And for the first time, the world didn't see a runaway or a rebel. They saw a mirror. He didn't shout. Didn't accuse. He simply told the story, from beginning to now. Of how his name was once a prison. How a homeless man shared a meal with him. Not because he had enough, but because he knew what it felt like to have nothing. How that was the moment that changed everything. Not the money. Not the mansion. Not the bloodline. A sandwich. Shared by someone the world refused to see. And when he was done, Ryder looked directly into the lens, voice low. My father is Maxwell Hale. But the man who raised me is Jeb. He didn't buy me anything. He just saw me. And he gave me the one thing my family never could, freedom. The video went viral in hours. Then it was news. Then it was movement. Protests formed outside Hale Corp buildings. Investors pulled out. Teenagers spray-painted, "Family is who feeds you when you're hungry," on city walls. Politicians, desperate to ride the wave, passed bills protecting youth shelters, increasing funding, all while pretending they'd cared the whole time. Ryder didn't care about the headlines. He only cared that fewer kids were sleeping cold, that fewer names were being forgotten. And Maxwell Hale? He vanished from public life. Not arrested, not punished, but exposed. And to men like him, that was the real death. Years passed. The den became more than a place. It became an idea. Ryder traveled under new names, always returning, always checking in. Sometimes he'd disappear for months, only to resurface with blueprints for a new safe house or a thumb drive full of data exposing corruption in child services. Jeb, older now, slower, but never weaker, stayed behind. The roots. The protector. One night, as twilight draped over the city like a blanket, Ryder sat beside him in the garden behind the den. Kids laughed inside. Music played soft through a cracked speaker. You ever think we'd get here? Ryder asked. Jeb smiled without looking. I didn't think you'd let us get anywhere else. They sat in silence a while, the kind that didn't need words. Then Jeb reached into his coat and pulled something out. A photograph. Ryder and a group of kids, all smiling. Family, Jeb said. Ain't blood. It's choice. Ryder nodded. You chose me. Jeb looked at him, eyes shining. No. You chose you. I just gave you half a sandwich and a seat in the rain. You did the rest. Ryder stood, heart full. He looked out at the city, the one that once hunted him, now holding him close. He thought of the boy he used to be. Dylan. Alone. Afraid. Lost in money but starving for meaning. And he thought of that first night. The rain, the bag of chips, the man with the kind eyes and a past too heavy to speak. That meal. That moment. It didn't just save a life. It ignited one. He turned to Jeb. You were the beginning. And Jeb, with a crooked smile and a voice like gravel and gold, said, No, kid. You're the future. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more inspiring content. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a new video. Let us know in the comments, what's the most meaningful act of kindness you've ever witnessed? Your support helps us continue sharing powerful stories that touch hearts. Stay tuned for more, and we'll see you in the next one.